So I'm going to wait just another minute or two. We have about half of the participants who have registered logged on right now. Okay, well, it's about 6 after, so why don't we go ahead and get started, and we'll continue to let people in who are not here yet. Just to let you know, little housekeeping things, this is being recorded and will be sent out to anybody who is registered tonight. And we'll also send out some additional resources if there are things that come up this evening that sound like they'll be beneficial to everyone that's attending. My name is Eileen Schaefer, and I'm the director of the Advocacy Center at the Arc of Loudoun. And we have 5 different programs on our campus. The Advocacy Center offers free information referral related to really any kind of disability, more specifically to intellectual and developmental disabilities, but we field phone calls and provide referrals and resources for any disability. We also do IEP consultations, but we do not go to IEP meetings with individuals. And our speakers tonight are Sharon Tropf and Lorraine Hightower. I've known both of them for a number of years, and they're both wonderful advocates who have been instrumental in creating systemic change throughout not only the county, but the state of Virginia. And they would be 2 go-to people for me if I had questions about things. We do refer parents and families to paid advocates. And I just thought the beginning of the school year would be a great time to do an Ask the Advocate kind of a program. So Sharon and Lorraine have created a PowerPoint, and they'll go over some kind of basic parent rights in special education with the group tonight. And then we have some questions that individuals have written in advance. Some of them are very specific. So just a disclaimer, both Sharon and Lorraine are advocates. They're not attorneys, so they can't give legal advice. They also, we really want to try to answer questions that could be beneficial to the group that are not so specific that it seems like they're giving legal advice to a family without knowing a lot about that individual situation or having the chance to review documentation and records. You will get their contact information at the end, so if you'd like to reach out to them individually after the presentation tomorrow, you're welcome to do that. So right now I will turn it over to Sharon. You're in the top of my screen. Would you like to go first and provide a little history about how you, kind of what your history is in the world of educational advocacy?
Okay. I've been working in as a, I would say, paid advocate for over 15 years. I first began with having my own business, and I got into advocacy after having to learn to travel this road with my own children. I have had 2 children out of my 3 that had IEPs. I had 1 child with dyslexia and 1 child on the autism spectrum. After I decided to stay home with my kids, and I worked for NASA as a project planner. And when I had to attend my first IEP meeting and I got my IEP, I was like, wow, this looks like a project plan. I can understand this, right? We define our requirements. We look at what resources we need to meet those requirements. Here's our deadlines, and here are the steps we're going to get there. So I could understand that. That played right into what I was used to doing in the business world. So I got into that with my children. And then after my children got older, I had people coming to me and asking me, hey, would you look at my IEP? And then I started working with an attorney, not for them, but with them, doing some support and casework for them. And then now I do work for an attorney's office as an advocate. And so I've been with Belkowitz Law for about 2.5 years now.
And you're the current chair of Loudoun County SEAC.
Yes, I am the current chair of the Loudoun County SEAC.
Yeah.
I also sit on the PTC board. So
Yeah.
I am a board member. I am their secretary.
So I had to add that about you, Sharon, because one of my claims to fame is helping to set you up as a chair of Loudoun County Special Education Advisory Committee. So my name's Lorraine Hightower. Nice to meet everyone. And I too have served as a past SEAC chair. So Sharon and I have that in common. But I first, my journey with advocacy truly began over 10 years ago with my own son, who is severely dyslexic, dysgraphic, and has ADHD. I had teachers, reassuring me in first grade and second grade that a lot of my parent instincts that something may be a little bit off. I wasn't seeing reading fluency at home. His spelling seemed to be different beyond the developmentally appropriate age. And I started advocating for my own son as a parent all of those years ago, and having my parent request for accommodations and services and what have you fall on somewhat deaf ears, because at the time our district really didn't have teacher training on dyslexia. We didn't have remediation programs on dyslexia. So unlike Sharon, who is, I don't want to speak for you, but you handle all disability categories, my advocacy practice is focused on meeting the unique needs of students with dyslexia. And for the past 10 years, I've worn a variety of hats, been aligned with Decoding Dyslexia Virginia and worked on state legislation, served as state SEAC chair, worked with the Virginia PTA on dyslexia teacher training. So, it is the most common learning disability, and unfortunately, our well-intentioned teachers know very little bit about it. And I've had a private advocacy business for about 2.5 years now. So kind of come to it from a different path. But like Sharon said, I have a background in corporate sales and marketing. And I think the one thing that we both agree on is that when we were in the corporate world, if there were situations or unique circumstances that required problem solving, the process was a lot more seamless and seemed like, the ability to look into a problem, propose a solution, and implement it was a whole lot easier than being the parent of a student with disabilities at IEP meetings. So we're happy to be here tonight and to help parents however we can through this process. And I think I'm going to start with this, Sharon. I believe we've kind of making sure we don't step on each other's toes here, going to share the presentation. But the one thing we wanted to give some context to is that as this new school year starts, our kids are really returning to school having not had a fourth quarter, pretty much, right? Whatever school district you're in, the governor closed schools as of March 13th, and that all of our students, especially our students with disabilities, have been at a disadvantage because they missed that fourth quarter of instruction and specially designed instruction. Teams were providing continuity of learning activities, but no specially designed instruction was in place during the fourth quarter. And we are well aware from the parents that we worked with and have talked to that parents were truly scrambling to meet the needs of their students. They didn't know, what was okay, not okay, how to continue these continuity of learning activities when it wasn't live teaching. So the good news to some degree is we are working with live teachers and we have more access to learning, but we realize people are having challenges with that, and we're going to talk a little bit about it.
Well, that's either your look at the beginning of the day, the middle of the day, or the end of the day, or all day. And I have to say, just like all of our disabilities, our parents and students' experiences with distance learning is a spectrum. I have some students that are doing very well in this environment. There's less social demands. And so if I have a student that has a lot of social difficulties, this environment may actually be a very good learning environment for them. They may struggle with some of the learning activities and need additional supports, but the activity or the platform may actually be a good platform for them. So I do have to say that we have, like with anything, there is a spectrum. So I have students who are doing well in this environment, and then I have parents sending me pictures of crying children laying on their desks or chairs or under the table and under a blanket and won't come out. So I think the spectrum is broad. Some families may be in the middle, some may be, this is overwhelming and my child can't, and then we may have some that are actually doing very well in this environment. So I think it depends on your child's unique needs and their individual needs as a student as to where you're falling on that spectrum. Because just like any, when you think of special ed, you kind of think of that pyramid of supports. We have a select population of students that simply just can't learn in front of a computer screen. So many of those students, and they're in a smaller percentage than the vast majority of our students, have not received any instruction. Even when we came back to providing instruction in April, have not really received or benefited any instruction because they are not able to access it independently. So that is a large concern for some of our population.
Yes, for
Lorraine?
sure. Yeah, and I would agree with you. I think the one thing that parents should take some comfort in is that from a federal Department of Education standpoint and perspective, that the provision of providing FAPE, a free and appropriate public education to students with disabilities, has not changed. It didn't go away with COVID-19, with the closure of schools, with the pandemic. And so we've just kind of highlighted here one of the important phrases, but if a school district is teaching, students, then there is a responsibility that students with disabilities are still getting FAPE, a free and appropriate public education. And that's going to look different, as Sharon just said, for each and every student. Some students are benefiting from different placement, different services, and we're going to talk a little bit more about those specific questions that you had as we move to the Q&A.
So as we kind of piggyback on the last statement, I want to say that the Virginia Department of Education, of course, is mimicking what the Department of Education, in some instances, is saying. So none of the requirements I outlined in IDEA and Section 504 for that matter, so I don't want to exclude any of our families that may have a Section 504 plan, the regulations governing special education programs for children. So nothing has been waived. Everything is still in place. And as a reminder to that, OSEP issued another Q&A fact paper on the 28th of September, reminding districts of those responsibilities.
Yep, and I think I'm just going to move ahead here.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is just to add on to what Sharon's saying, this is a really important guidance document because it does say, and I just want parents to take a moment to read this. I'm going to leave it up for a second, but no matter what primary instructional delivery approach is chosen, and that has to do with instructional day, what have you. I mean, it can be different for every child. So while Sharon and I have both heard the frustration of parents who say, school boards are putting certain practices in place. This is impacting my student with disabilities. What's my recourse? How should these decisions be made? OSEP is basically reminding state and local education agencies that the plans for students with disabilities must continue to be individualized and appropriate to their unique needs. And that's in spite of what's happening with Tier 1 general education students. So this is a really powerful and important document and reaffirms what the federal Department of Ed and the state Department of Ed have been saying.
So Lorraine, I think this slide, before we move on to this,
sure.
I think that slide is so important, and at the end of our presentation is the link to that, but in bold and highlighted in that document that came out from OSEP on the 28th, it says that no matter what the primary instructional delivery approach is, so whether it's hybrid or in-person or partial, that the IEP team remains responsible for ensuring that a free, appropriate public education is provided for all students. So again, as Elaine said, the school board can set policy and guidelines, but the IEP team, they reaffirmed that the IEP team should be making the decisions for each of our students with disabilities.
And we do realize this is not every parent's experience. We're going to talk about that. But another important document, and we're sharing all this, and we're going to provide links, and I know Eileen will push them out to parents who need these resources. But another critical document that has just come out from the U.S. Department of Education has to do with COVID-19 recovery services. So this is the U.S. Department of Education acknowledging for parents and informing school districts that they fully expect that many students with disabilities who have IEPs may require COVID-19 recovery services. These are additional services on top of what the IEP team has determined, because without the benefit of instruction since March 13th, once school teams collect that baseline data, if a student has regressed or they haven't made meaningful progress towards their IEP goals, this COVID-19 resource document does give school teams some suggested criteria that they should be considering to inform how they make a determination on services. But again, this is something that Sharon and I hear about. Parents are like, well, they're not getting their services. They're saying this is all that's possible in the distance learning environment. And again, as we move through this, we hope that you leave here with a better understanding of what you as parents can use tools and guidance to advocate for what you know your child requires and what federal and state Department of Ed agrees that they require.
Your procedural safeguards. So when we were in person meetings, Loudoun was very good about giving you, they made their procedural safeguards different colors so you would know when they changed. Other school divisions didn't do that, but the procedural safeguards have not changed. So none of your procedural safeguards, from IEEs to going to due process or mediation or any other procedural safeguard that is outlined in that document. And if you don't have a copy of that document because you refused it at the school, it is available online at the VDOE website. And now if you are having an IEP meeting, IEP teams are sending that electronic link in your meeting invite. So take a look at that. Go back and read that document so you can refresh your memory about what your rights are. Those are your procedural safeguards, and they are still there, and they are still 100% in force.
Yes. Thank you, Sharon. And again, we just can't say it enough, that everything feels like it's changed with this pandemic, but at the same time, regarding regulations for students with disabilities, nothing has changed, right? So and we're just going to highlight a few of the important procedural safeguards that we want to make sure parents know about. The first is parental consent. So a lot of questions have come in, for me and for Sharon outside of this meeting regarding giving consent to the IEP, giving consent to evaluations, giving consent to extend timelines. Parents in Virginia, we are fortunate in that in Virginia it is a consent state for parents. So before a school district initiates, starts, stop, changes, anything that has to do with students who have disabilities, parents are to be given the opportunity to give or withhold consent. I know Eileen has some questions that we're going to talk about. Parents are concerned about giving consent to amended parent statements. We'll get to that a little later on. But there are ways to give full consent, partial consent, or no consent. It's important for parents to know that you are in the driver's seat when it comes to consent with your child's IEP team.
Sorry, I had you on mute because there's a lot of outside noise going on in my neighborhood all of a sudden. I think they're having a party or something I wasn't invited to. So independent educational evaluations. At any time the school division has done any type of an assessment, so if they've done a psychological assessment, an educational assessment, a functional behavior assessment, an assistive technology, an orientation and mobility, if you had a student with a vision impairment, anytime they do an assessment, the parents have a right to an independent evaluation of that assessment. So you can write to the school division. John Lodi, the Director of Preventative and Diagnostic Services, is now overseeing the approval of IEEs. you would just write a letter or a quick email to him saying, my son or daughter had an evaluation completed by Loudoun County Public Schools, and I don't agree with that evaluation. I am requesting an IEE. If you look in that procedural safeguard manual document that we mentioned a couple minutes ago that they give you at every IEP meeting, the outline of how you go about asking for that IEE is outlined in that document, and it talks about the things that a school division can and can't do. So the school division they can ask you why you disagree, but you don't have to have a reason other than you disagree. So the school division cannot make you feel pressured or afraid to ask. All you really have to say is, I disagree with this evaluation, and I would like, it's kind of like that second opinion. You go and get to the doctor, you get that first opinion, and you're not maybe comfortable with that first opinion. So you go and get a second opinion that is an independent source that can give, often the evaluator can give a situation fresh eyes, a fresh look at something. So they are very valuable tools to get an independent evaluation. I don't know, Lorraine, if you have anything to add to that.
I think, no, that's great. The only thing I would add is that I think parents should know that while school districts often send a list of recommended evaluators, that they have the prerogative to select whichever private evaluator they would like to evaluate their child, provided that they meet the criteria that's often outlined in the approval letter when you put in for an independent educational evaluation. So if you get a list of evaluators from the district, they are required to propose some evaluators that can evaluate your child, but you're not limited to picking from that list. So I think that's just the only thing I would add, Sharon, to what you said. Many parents don't know that they have a choice.
Yes, and I have to say that if you are in Loudoun County, our list that the county provides is very small. Mm-hmm. And so I would suggest that you do your homework, just like with any decision that you're making. Do your homework, go out and research providers based on your child's disability. So if your child has dyslexia, then you would be looking for a evaluator that has a lot of background with dyslexia. If your child has ADHD, you would want to go to somebody who's maybe their practice focuses on ADHD, or that's one of their primary disabilities that they work with. So you really want to make sure that you do your homework and pick a good evaluator, because if you're taking your child out of school to go and get this evaluation, you want it to be a thorough evaluation, but you also want it to give you the right information to be able to bring that back to the IEP team, to be able to answer questions and be able to move forward.
Yeah, that's true. And I think some of what I've seen in terms of the difference between different evaluators is some do a great job of assessing, but they don't always give enough detail on the implications of their findings. So let's just say they make a great diagnosis and the test is really, done thoroughly and comprehensively, and you see the difference, but then you're not really left with what are all the implications of a student having this disability. So as Sharon said, you do want to do your homework, talk to other parents, maybe Eileen, Sharon and I are happy to provide recommendations as well, but go in with eyes wide open when you're selecting your evaluator. Another important procedural safeguard is prior written notice. So sometimes it's referred to as PWN, and I know many parents don't really realize what this document is until they receive it in the mail, or it's attached as part of their IEP. But prior written notice, again, is a document that the school creates. So parents don't really get any input on what's in the prior written notice, but it's a document that they create that is very helpful because it records decision making. So anytime the school district, as we said, is proposing to initiate, start, stop, change, any services that have to do, or evaluations, what have you, any actions that have to do with students with disabilities, they record that proposed action in prior written notice. And they're also supposed to record the data that was considered as part of that decision making, other factors that were discussed. There's about 7 recommended criteria that should be included in a school district's prior written notice. And for parents, it's important to know that when you request a school district start, stop, change, anything, any services, any accommodations, any new evaluations that you're asking the school district, to take action on that benefits your student with disabilities, the district is supposed to document that request as well as their decision and the data that they use. So this can be important just for record keeping, but for parents who are in, egregious situations and they want documentation of why they're being refused certain requests, whether it's services or anything, evaluations, eligibility, all of that is documented in prior written notice. So if you're not getting a prior written notice document after your IEP meeting, I would absolutely request one of your child's case manager. And, become in the habit of, when you're in IEP meetings, if you ask for, let's just say, increased services based upon your own parental data, and the school team says no, encourage them to explain why, and then ensure that they are going to document all of that in prior written notice. So Sharon, do you want to add on to that?
I do. I have one thing to say about prior notices, that prior notice needs to be provided prior to a parent being asked to sign the IEP.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that is so important, and especially for our families that also maybe the parents have a disability, or they don't speak English as their native language. So if, for example, you speak Vietnamese as your primary language and you get the IEP in English, and while you can read it, you would better understand it in Vietnamese, you can ask the county to translate that for you. It needs to be in language that you can understand. So it can be provided to you in your native language. And in order to give informed parental consent, you need to understand what you're signing. Mm-hmm. And so if you had an alternative even communication mode, say you use sign language, or you have a vision impairment and you need it to be in a format that your computer, maybe you use JAWS on your computer and you need it to be able to be read to you, then all of that can be provided so you can provide informed parental consent before you sign the IEP. So I just want to put that out there, that a lot of times parents don't realize, if they're not a native speaker, they may have a translator in the meeting, but you can also have those documents translated in your native language or in your communication mode provided to you so you can read them again at home. Because just because you participated in the meeting doesn't mean that we all go home and reread things. And that's often why we record the meetings, because sometimes especially if it's a very energetic or a high emotion kind of IEP meeting, you may not remember things exactly the way they occurred. So it's always good that you can go back and listen. But you need to be able to read and look at those documents in your communication mode or in your native language before you give informed consent.
Yes. And that was perfect that you mentioned audio recording, because we do want to highlight that audio recording is a parent's procedural safeguard. So all of the eligibility or IEP meetings that you attend do provide for the parent to audio record those meeting discussions. It is, of course, good form as a parent to give advance notice that you plan to audio record these meetings, because while we're on a virtual setting, it's easy for most school teams to hit the record button. But if we're back in school buildings, they do need to they like to have their own recorder. They want to be prepared to produce their own audio recording. And I have been in meetings where if we don't give appropriate advance notice, sometimes 15 minutes of the meeting is involving finding a device to record the meeting. So as Sharon said, these recordings are very helpful for parents if it's a highly emotional meeting, or I think it's very hard for parents to process what is being said, review data, participate in a meeting that's about their own child, which obviously would be highly emotional. So, parents do say, well, I don't want the school team to get the wrong impression. I'm now asking to audio record. I'm not really comfortable doing that. And my recommendation is simply to say, I have a hard time taking this all in. So I've started, making it my practice to audio record all of the meetings that I go to. And that way you have a recording to listen to refer back to, and it can be helpful if you need to move forward with any type of dispute resolution action steps as well. There you go. So Sharon, do you want to review the parents' dispute resolution options?
Sure. So there are a variety of dispute resolution options. And something new that has been, I would say, in the last year, a year and a half, maybe two, is the facilitated IEPs is often a step that it's not really a part of dispute resolution, but I have seen where mediated agreements, they come back and go to maybe a facilitated IEP meeting. So a facilitated IEP meeting is where we have an independent person facilitating the IEP. So they're not a decision maker. They're just like a mediator. They're impartial. They're there just to make sure that the process occurs. And so that is available in Loudoun. Loudoun has used that before. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. Mediation is kind of the next step that often parents will go to. Mediation is you go through Art Stewart at the Virginia Department of Education. It is both parties have to agree. So the school division can request to go to mediation, or a parent can request to go to mediation, but either side could decline. But it is a good way to come together and try to work out your differences with a non-partial mediator in the room. Lorraine, do you have anything to add to that about mediation? I just be careful with the agreement language. Sometimes if you come to an agreement, they want you to sign a confidentiality statement, which that is fine, but you have to be careful with the language that they put in there that's saying that this will dismiss all of your grievances. So sometimes you may want, if you have an attorney that you're working with, or a family attorney, you may want them to look at that language before you sign. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I will just say that I think a lot of times, parents feel like, well, certainly an attorney is an excellent resource, especially one who focuses on special education students. But mediation does give parents a meaningful step that they can take that, as Sharon said, involves someone provided by the state. It's supposed to be a neutral third-party moderator who is going to help ensure that decision-making takes place around grievances that exist, or disputes, if you will. So I think parents should take advantage of that opportunity if the school district agrees to participate, because the third option, which I know Sharon's going to talk about, due process, it's often a collaborative way to discuss these issues prior to having to take formal legal action. And as Sharon said, we do always caution parents to really read the fine print. If you're not pleased with the proposed mediated agreement and you don't agree that it absolves 5 years of prior disputes or what have you, then you may need to consider filing due process and not stopping at the mediation level. But for those parents, many parents do reach resolution at mediation, I guess is what I want to say. And so it's a wonderful alternative to having to hire and engage an attorney if you can avoid that. But Sharon, why don't you talk a little bit about due process? I didn't mean to interrupt.
I wanted to add in another kind of step. Some school districts have administrative review as a step also before. So sometimes you can request an administrative review of a situation or a conflict that you're having at the IEP team table. Fairfax offers this, Prince William County offers an administrative review level. So I just wanted to kind of mention that as an option that's kind of in there for some school districts. And then of course, due process. Due process in Virginia, parents can represent themselves. Advocates can actually take parents through due process. I would not recommend that. I think it, and I would never do that. Of course, I work for a law firm, and we do have attorneys that do that. But there are a lot of motions and filings and subpoenaing records and timelines that have to be followed. And once all of that is done, you go before an administrative law judge and you present your case. These can go anywhere between, I don't know, 2 days to a week. I've seen them go a very long time. Due processes can be filed as an open due process where the public can come in, or a closed due process where it's just the parties that are involved. These typically take place either at they can take place at the attorney's office, or they can take place at the school administration building. They can be costly because you are involving an attorney, and there are many hours of compiling data and putting together the briefs and things that go into that, and the just the presentation. And then there's, if you are having witnesses, I can't think of the right word, professionals, help me, Lorraine.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Professional witnesses, expert
Right.
testimony.
Thank you. Expert testimony. Oh, I could not think of the word expert. Expert, that's my old brain there. Expert testimony. So then you would have to, of course, hire your experts to come in and testify on your behalf. So you are putting on like a little mini trial, so to speak. You are going to present everything. And if you have your experts, that also can become costly. Now, if the parent does prevail, the attorneys can seek reimbursement for the attorney's fees. As a part of that settlement, they would have to go to court and present to be reimbursed.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. So I think this brings us to the Q&A part of the discussion, and Eileen generously forwarded us some questions that parents have sent in. I'm just going to read some of these, and then Sharon and I will give you our thoughts on them. As Eileen said, we don't want to attempt to give individual recommendations for a particular student, and we don't want to give recommendations that a parent might take action on without us having reviewed their cumulative file and seen all of their data. But we're going to do our best to give you our opinion of some action steps that parents can take as they're trying to advocate for their children. So the first question, Sharon, this is really, I'm going to direct this at you because it's for the population of students that you serve, has to do with a parent who has 2 autistic sons with severe sleeping issues, and one of them has started having seizures last year, and they've been missing a lot of their virtual classes due to health concerns. And so her question is, should she look into homeschooling for them because of their health issues, but she really doesn't know where to begin? And she's looking for our advice on this. And as I said, we're not going to really give you our opinion because we don't have enough data to give you our opinion, but we certainly can talk about the homeschooling option and how a parent might begin that.
So I see quite a few different layers here of things that would need to be addressed. So anytime you have a student with a disability, even if we have a 504 plan or an IEP, if they have health concerns in the IEP, there's a whole section in the front of the IEP where we would outline the health concerns. Also, if you have a health concern that rises to a certain level, so if we have diabetes, if we have severe anaphylactic allergies, I mean, and again, allergies can be by ingestion or even by touch. I have some students who are so highly allergic that if they just touch something that someone else has a protein on their hand that could be left residue behind, they may go into anaphylaxis just by touch. So, you know, some health conditions rise to a very severe or life-threatening level. The student should have a healthcare plan. So anytime their health needs impact their ability to attend school and to learn and to benefit from that instruction, you should have a healthcare plan outlining the needs. So in this case, if they have sleep apnea, or a lot of our students with autism have difficulty with sleep regulation. It is very difficult for them to achieve REM sleep, and it is very difficult for them to go to sleep. They can't seem to shut down. And then some of our students may go to sleep for very short periods of time, maybe 3 hours, and then wake up and be up for several hours and then go back to sleep. So sleeping difficulties for our autistic population is common. So when that does occur, I would suggest that parents of any child that has a mitigating health issue would go to that treating physician and ask for a letter that very clearly outlines the health issue that needs to be defined, and then put in the letter how that health issue is going to impact the child's ability to attend and receive their education. So from that, the school division should prompt them to put together a healthcare plan to address that, and some accommodations can be put in a healthcare plan. However, the Section 504 ADA OCR has issued guidance that if you have a healthcare plan, that most likely you should have a 504 plan. So you should always look at having a 504 plan that accompanies your healthcare plan if you don't have an IEP. If you have an IEP, you would want to reference your healthcare plan in that beginning health section. And then if there are accommodations that impact learning, for example, our diabetic students, if they were having a reaction, of course, we wouldn't want them to be taking a test. So we would want to delay their test taking until they were not in a high or a low situation. We would want to make sure that their blood sugars were within a specific range. So in this case, with the health issues, we might want to think about, what if the student needs a modified or flexible day? If they may need a later start time. So if the student were to have a later start time, maybe they attend their classes in the afternoon. If they're in a middle or high school situation and they're looking at maybe taking more than 4 years to graduate, maybe we look at, well, maybe if we extend the time of the students in high school past their 12th grade year, we can push that out, and you can have a 5-year plan or a 6-year plan. Students can stay through their 21st year. So there is a lot of flexibility in looking at and addressing some of these issues through having the doctors write a letter, clearly outline the issues. We can look at, do we need a modified or a flexible day? Do we need to have a healthcare plan? Do we need to address that in the IEP, that the student has a delayed start? Of course, if the health issue is so significant that they cannot attend school, then of course you may want to consider homebound instruction. And this time, I know Loudoun has issued a guidance document saying that all their homebound instruction will be virtual, but again, the IEP team for a student with disability has to decide what those services look like and how they're delivered. So some of those things are kicked back to the IEP team, even if you're getting homebound instruction. The second part about homeschooling, Lorraine, you want to talk about homeschooling?
Yeah, I was going to say we had a couple of questions come in that were asking about, can I remove my child for homeschooling? Can I put them in a private school? We had a few questions that asked about that. And the answer is yes. As parents, you can, disenroll or unenroll your child from public school to homeschool them or to parentally place them, meaning you as a parent have decided to change their placement to a private school. That is within your parental rights to do so. A couple of important points though about homeschooling is, if you are removing a child and you're going to be providing the instruction, there are certain criteria that parents have to meet in order to be able to act as the teacher and provide the homeschool instruction. And there is an expectation that those students will be assessed by an outside evaluator to ensure that they are meeting the curriculum requirements as a homeschooled student. So I just want to make sure parents are aware of that. And when we're talking about private school, a lot of parents are very frustrated right now. They don't feel their school district is providing a free and appropriate public education. Their child is upset, and they are done with IEP meetings, let's say, and they're like, I'm just going to place them in this private school, and then I'm going to ask Loudoun County for reimbursement because they weren't able to meet the needs. One important detail that I want to make sure parents are aware of is if you do remove as a parent your child from the public school and you place them in a private school with the intention of coming back and asking for reimbursement as part of that new placement, you are required to give 10-day notice to the school district and to let the IEP team know that you're going to change their placement, you don't believe they're providing FAPE, and that you're giving them 10-day notice of your intent to place them in a private school. Now, the IEP team may come back and say, well, we respect your decision, but we believe we've provided an IEP that allows for FAPE, and we believe we can meet your child's needs here. But by giving the 10-day notice, you do preserve your parental right to any type of request for reimbursement. Whereas if you just remove your child and you don't provide that required 10-day notice, then you really don't have the option of coming back and requesting any type of reimbursement for having to place your child at a private school that was meeting their unique educational and potentially emotional needs as well. So Sharon, that was a lot. I don't know if you want to add on to that or if you have anything else.
I think the one thing that some parents have asked too that I have seen is, if I take my child out of school, out of Loudoun County or any school district, and place them or homeschool them, what happens to my IEP?
Oh, yes.
So your IEP is still there. So
Yeah.
say you remove your child and you place them in, you homeschool them or you place them in a private school, and 3 or 4 years down the road, you decide you're going to re-enroll them.
Mm-hmm.
Your IEP is still there. So the IEP that you had when you unenrolled or disenrolled your child is still in place. So that last agreed upon IEP and the placement noted in that IEP is still the stay put. It's still there.
Mm-hmm.
Within that time frame that you're gone, the school district should still be asking you to have IEP meetings, and they can develop a student plan, an individual student plan for you to have while you're homeschooling or while your child is attending a private school, to still keep in contact with you and still monitor their progress. And any triennial reviews should also still take place while you're either homeschooling or place them in a private school. So the school division still has a responsibility, even though you have removed your child from the LEA.
Yes, and that's a great point. And I just want to add, because some parents remove their child to a private school in a different school district, that it's the responsibility of the school district where the child, is zoned to attend, that is responsible for doing what Sharon just shared with everyone. Working collaboratively at a minimum of once a year with the private school or the parent who's homeschooling. And ensuring as part of Child Find that the student with disabilities is still being served, even though they're not in the public school system. So we had another question though, Sharon, that relates to this. And it had to do with what happens if I choose to return my student back to the public school system. And I'll just start this and then you can jump in. But as Sharon said, your IEP hasn't expired, so it hasn't gone away. It still exists within the county if you're looking to return your student back into the public school system. But as part of that transition, if they have been gone for 3 years, 4 years, I mean, it depends if it's 6 months versus 3 years, because the county may require updated testing to get some baseline data for your child as part of that transition back to the public school. They may need to look at, are their needs still the same in terms of what do they need to be concerned with for services and accommodations? Does the child still require what they had in the prior IEP? So parents do, as we said, it doesn't expire, it doesn't go away, but if you have been gone for a certain period of time, you should expect as part of that return back to the public school system that the district may wish to do updated testing and look at present levels and now make informed decisions about where your child is on the point of return. So Sharon, we had one question who asked about placement. Do you want to talk about, this parent was concerned because they had private day placement when they were leaving, let's say for homeschooling or private school, and she wanted to know, is she guaranteed private day placement for her son or daughter when they transition back, if they come back to a public school? Sorry.
Right. So the IEP that you leave with is the IEP that you come back with. But remember, placement decisions are an IEP team decision. Mm-hmm. So your child will grow and change and mature over the amount of time that you have them out of the school district. So if you left in 2nd grade and then you came back in 8th grade, that's a very different child than what left in second grade. So that placement may no longer be appropriate. It may not be that child's least restrictive environment. So the IEP team, as Lorraine said, we would want to have, you know, updated assessments, and we would want to have a lot of feedback and input from the private school, the current placement. So the IEP team then can make those informed decisions to make sure that we have a very detailed IEP about what's working for them in the private school, what's not, and so you can move forward and make those decisions. But your stay put placement would still be in the last agreed upon IEP that you have with the district.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. So we have, I'm mindful of the time here, so I'm going to start moving faster through some of these questions. We had a question that came in, and they were asking us to share information about reading programs, specifically Linda Mood Bell, for young adults who have exited the school system. So not knowing if these young adults have dyslexia, you know, a language processing disorder or not, I'm going to assume that they do as I answer this question, because there are, you know, a variety of reading programs out there. But in this case, because they're asking about Linda Mood Bell, which is a reading program that has been evidence-based to be effective for students with dyslexia, I'm going to assume that this parent is considering programs for a dyslexic young adult or multiple dyslexic young adults. So the key thing when you're looking for an appropriate and effective remediation program for students with dyslexia is that it has to have certain components. It has to be, you know, based on a structured literacy program that is multisensory, explicitly taught, phonologically based, cumulative, sequential, requiring mastery at every level. And there are a variety of, you know, programs that a parent can consider in meeting these unique needs of their student. Many of them follow an Orton-Gillingham approach. So I know in many school districts, parents hear the term Orton-Gillingham, which was an approach, a methodology created by two doctors that determined that this, you know, teaching explicit phonologically based instruction in a certain method is what is working for students to acquire literacy skills. So there's plenty of years of evidence that this methodology does work. A couple of programs, in addition to Linda Mood Bell, there's the Barton Spelling and Reading System, there's Wilson Language, there's, you know, phonographics, there's Spire system in Prince William. There's a variety of programs. And as we keep saying, parents need to look at what are the unique needs of their child, what are their deficits, which program is it, you know, there's certain tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 interventions, right? Our school districts in Northern Virginia, some of them offer a tier 1 structured literacy program, hoping that they can prevent kids from ending up as special education students. And then we have some school districts that are providing, you know, literacy remediation that isn't appropriate given the student's significant needs. So as a quick answer to this question, I think Sharon and I are fine with Linda Mood Bell. They have a proven track record of closing achievement gaps. I will say that one of their, let's just say, recommendations is intensity and repetition of instruction. So Linda Mood Bell does tend to require or request students work for multiple hours per day, 5 days a week, and that while that's perfectly fine, that's not always going to be appropriate for a young student. So you just need to, with whoever's delivering the private literacy remediation that hopefully is based on a structured literacy program, that they're working with your student. And if they have attention concerns or they're super young, that the pacing of that instruction is also being considered. Okay, so Sharon, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add on to that, but we have a lot more questions here. So this parent, I think we talked about, oh, we have a question about Virginia attendance compulsory law. This parent is concerned that due to COVID-19 and her son's health issues, she doesn't want to make a transition to a private day school. I believe she had private day school before. So she's planning to keep her son in public school for the time being. However, she's very concerned that she may have issues with Virginia attendance compulsory law and is wondering how should she handle this. And I know you talked a little bit about the health plan, so I'll let you explain a little bit more about that.
Well, in Virginia, we do have compulsory attendance. That was one of the big differences that the VDOE cited in their COVID documents and some of materials that they published in their Q&As. So compulsory attendance means that all students ages 6 through high school are required to attend school. If your child misses 15 consecutive days, they are unenrolled from the school roster, and you will be receiving phone calls and from the attendance office, and you also from the school resource officer who does attendance. Sorry, I have the dog coming in. He learned to open the door. So, you know, attendance is taken very serious. The Virginia Department of Education has published some new guidance documents on attendance that show how attendance is linked to graduation and higher performance. And so our school divisions, I mean, Loudoun issued a proclamation on attendance. So they're taking attendance very, very seriously. So in thinking about our students with disabilities that may have mitigating factors that may prevent students from having good attendance. Again, if it is a health reason, then we need to be working with our medical professionals. If it is a mental health reason, I mean, we need to be working with our mental health providers, and Loudoun Mental Health has a variety of crisis intervention teams that can also help. There's CR2, that can help with services in the home if we have a child in crisis. So there are many steps for different levels of why the student may not be able to be attending school. So we need to look at that. Again, what is that child's unique needs? If they have school avoidance due to extreme anxiety, then we would want to be working with that child's mental health professionals and the school. Now, on the school side, we should be looking at that from a mental health side and a behavioral side of how we're going to approach that. So on the school side, we can enlist our SIF-Bs in Loudoun County, those behavioral professionals, to work with the IEP team on identifying. The school team might decide to do a functional behavior assessment to determine why the student may be having some of these school avoidance behaviors or behaviors that are preventing them to come to school. And we can work together with the mental health providers on coming up with viable plans. It really depends on the child's unique needs. So attendance is mandatory. Students have to be in school, but if there are mitigating factors, those need to be identified, and the school team should be coming together to address them. And our middle and high schools, we have our unified mental health teams that can help with that. And in the elementary schools, we do have unified mental health teams. We just don't have them at each school. So they have to kind of pull resources from multiple schools. But there are many levels to this again. And for our school avoidance and anxiety students, if your child is starting to show any signs, I know now we're in a virtual environment, but if we're showing any signs of having difficulty going into the school building or even logging on virtually, you need to be in contact with your school team and sharing this information and asking for their help to help you support your child. What can we do together and partner together to address this? Because as a parent, if you take this all on yourself, you're not going to be able to solve it. You really do need to do a team approach. Yeah. Lorraine, do you have anything to add?
Well, I completely agree with everything that you said. And I think one of the shifts that we're hoping parents will make this first quarter of this new year, is that we're no longer in a state of an emergency as a country, right? Schools are open. So all of the professionals that Sharon just, mental health teams, counselors, teachers, they need to take whatever data parents have, and let's just say it's a psychiatrist who's put together a treatment plan and outlined the implications of that student's mental health disorder. The school team needs to consider those implications and what accommodations need to be put in place, whether it's a late start time, a flexible schedule, more breaks, a reduced curriculum. So yeah, I completely agree with what Sharon had to say about that, and that I'm glad that you mentioned some of the specific school staff that exists to help parents navigate through that issue if that's what they're having with their child. And you do this more than I do in terms of these students, Sharon. So if a private psychiatrist is making a recommendation regarding attendance, or, you know, what is the consideration that an IEP team, in your opinion, should be given to that? I mean, I feel they should include that in the IEP. It should be meaningfully considered along with parent data.
Just like when you bring in an outside evaluation, say you had an evaluation done at parent expense, the IEP team, for any type of an evaluation, the language in the regulation says shall consider. So the IEP team must give it due diligence. We have to really look at that information. We have to take that information into consideration. Sometimes we may even have the doctor participate in an IEP meeting so they can share information. But the more collaboration and more communication, and early on when we start to see some of these warning signs that we can bring in, maybe the school psychologist, the school social worker. The school social worker can come in and observe the child, and they can add to the IEP social worker services. You can add counseling hours to the IEP to work on certain issues. So for many of my students that have a lot of anxiety and school attendance issues, we started this year, even in a virtual environment, having the school social worker and the school psychologist, these are for our middle and high school students, meeting with the students beginning in August. So we started having them have virtual meetings, you know, how are you doing? How are you know, how are things going? You know, and just start that relationship building again, because relationship building is key and essential to being able to work with the student and the family. So we started building some of those, front loading some of those counseling services into our IEPs early in the process. So when school started, we were ready. All of our relationships had been reestablished and were solid, hopefully, with between the student and the school team. So we were ready to go.
Yeah, and I would just add on, for the population of students that I work with, what we're seeing, and we're adding new services to support this, are executive function challenges. Because just like Sharon was saying, while these students were able to access the curriculum a little bit easier in the school building and function more independently, they are requiring a lot more support in a virtual setting. So we are advocating for and getting additional services, additional assistive technology support and training. So, you know, we want parents to hear from both Sharon and from me that if your child's needs have changed because of this unique placement in distance learning and virtual classroom, you should feel comfortable advocating for those additional services or accommodations. So this next question, I'll just read it, has to do with a parent who wanted to discuss a specific math class for her son. He's at the high school level, and he was supposed to take, I think, let me just read it. It says, I wanted to discuss the specific math class my son would take in 9th grade, what classes he would take in order to achieve his standard diploma. I was told that the IEP only determines placement and not the course. Is this true? And how can you determine placement if you do not know the course, especially at the high school level? So I know Sharon and I were talking about, and I'll give you the chance to talk specifically about your thoughts, but as part of a student's IEP, transition is a really important section. And I know Sharon and I have talked many times that we don't feel as advocates that public school districts have kind of risen to the occasion on providing meaningful transition services. But definitely, if a student is working towards a standard diploma and they have to take certain courses in order to reach that goal, that has to be a part of an IEP team discussion. So Sharon, do you want to talk a little bit about how courses can be split up or divided, or some of the Virginia Department of Education guidance on that for this parent? Oh, you're on mute, Sharon. You're on mute.
You know, I hear that at least 20 times a day. So, you know, when you talk about the transition services, beginning at age 14 and 16, they have to look at transition assessments. Now, the assessments can be a variety of things, but as a part of that, especially
Well, while you're taking a drink of water, I just want to add on, for this, Sharon, so that you can touch on it, she was told that her son had to take a specific math course. So
Okay.
you can work that into your explanation. Yeah.
So to kind of go into that, you know, we need to be looking at, especially if the child is working for a standard diploma, the Virginia Department of Education has offered many pathways to a standard diploma. So as such, the IEP team should be looking at what courses the child needs. So some of the courses that can be split into a part 1 and a part 2 are some of the barrier tests that they need SOLs for. So the Virginia Department of Education has acknowledged that our students, many of them can earn a standard diploma, but they may need to have courses broken down, and only for students with disabilities have they given them the ability to get credit for each one of those. So you can break algebra into 2 parts, you can break geometry into 2 parts, you can break US and Virginia government into 2 parts, you can have a modified econ and personal finance course. There are things that are put in place specifically for our students with disabilities because we want to encourage and have them all striving to earn that standard diploma. Now, if we're looking at a particular course, we'll just pick on algebra and say the student has math a disability and is really struggles with math, which many of our students do. They could, the IEP team could state that the student needs to take the course offering as a part 1 and a part 2. So again, that goes back to the IEP team decision. If the IEP team determines that the student needs to have the math course broken into a part 1 and a part 2, then the school needs to work to provide that. You know, having the student take a standard algebra class, if they have or significant delays or gaps in their math foundation, may put so much pressure and anxiety on the student that we cause other mental health issues or other issues. So we really need to look at what does the student need and what does the student require. And I might say that in the virtual environment, it is, I would think, have more flexibility for a teacher. So for example, if the student was taking a self-contained algebra class, within that regular algebra class, they could differentiate that instruction for that student to do that class and take it as a part 1. There is plenty of flexibility within our structure to be able to do that. We have our learning lab time. We have our self-contained study hall time that students can be pulled for instruction for. So really it would be up to the IEP team. The IEP team should make that decision. Now, often you'll hear, well, we don't offer that course here, or we don't have a teacher for that course. But again, it has to come back to the IEP team. And I want to refer us back to that OSEP letter. We have to take the individual child's needs into consideration and take that back to the IEP team to do that. Sometimes if the school team needs assistance with that, they might want to refer to their special education supervisor to help them on how to create a course to do that. Or you can even look at I would say I would start there. You can always call the Virginia Department of Education. I always want to throw that out there that you can call and talk to the VDOE on these issues also. So if you get an answer when it comes to something about credit accommodations and some of the course offerings and how we're going to break things into chunks for our students with disabilities. This is only for students with disabilities so they can achieve that standard diploma. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call Virginia Department of Education if you're being told one thing in an IEP meeting here, and then you talk to the Virginia Department of Education, they go, oh, no, we have expanded our guidance and school divisions have been directed to do A, B, and C, and D. So we want to make sure that our division is doing A, B, C, and D. There would always be the ability, if we weren't, to file perhaps a state complaint on an issue like that. So I would want to say you want to do your research on that, but everything on these Course offerings should be discussed fully as a part of transition because it does lead to a path for a diploma, which is a part of the transition section of the IEP. And that should be very embellished with the student's strengths and needs and their preferences, but it should also be looking at what viable steps need to be taken by the student to reach the diploma that has been selected by the IEP team. If it's an advanced diploma, a standard diploma, or an applied studies diploma, all of it should be appropriately ambitious based on the child's unique needs to meet that or to work towards and take steps towards meeting that graduation requirement.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And the other thing, this parent went on to say, if my son needs, based upon his unique needs, a particular course as part of, we're saying as part of his transition plan, the mom says, what if he's the only student in the class? Is the school obligated to offer the course? And we would say yes, potentially, if that's what he needs in terms of his transition plan to meet his graduation requirements. So I know we only have about 15 minutes left, that Eileen, we want to open it up, or if there are questions in the chat, Eileen, we want to give the opportunity to answer clarifying questions or talk about anything else that might have popped up from the meeting participants.
We do, thank you.
Okay, sure.
So if there's anyone on the webinar that would like to, you can utilize the question and answer section to put in your questions. You can also use the chat area at the bottom of the page if you'd like to put your questions in that way.
Okay. Do you have any questions, Eileen?
I do. I wanted to know, well, I have a couple. I wanted to know if you would talk about the parent statement that was recently added. There've been obviously a lot of questions about whether parents should sign that, if they're obligated to sign that, and where things stand with the school board.
Yes. So I'll just start, and of course Sharon can give her thoughts. But I want to say kudos to the parents that did advocate when they were not comfortable with those amended parent statement pages that looked very different from what they had received before in IEP meetings. There were additional paragraphs that took away, well, it didn't take away, I should say, made it, possible for a school IEP team to make changes to their child's IEP amendment without a meeting. And some parents, weren't sure why that was now being added, and it had to do with changes of instructional hours and placement and virtual versus in school. So we want to thank the parents who offered public comment to their school board members and advocated for their kids, because, Sharon and I were just talking about prior to this presentation, that page is getting a second look by the Triple S committee. Is that right, Sharon? And many school board members are well aware that parents are not comfortable with this new language, that they want to be collaborative. They want to sign their child's IEP if they agree with it, but they're not comfortable with all of this new disclaimer language, if you will, that says that they're not entitled to request any makeup services, or that school teams can have a meeting without their parental consent. So Sharon, you have been involved with the Triple S committee. Do you know what their process is and when we can expect an answer on the proposed form, or if expected revisions might be coming down the pike? Oh, you're on mute again.
Sorry. At the last school board meeting, Atusa Reeser and Beth Bartz brought this concern up to the school board, and the parent statement, or the prior notice and parent or guardian consent language is being sent to the Triple S committee. So that will take place in October. The Triple S committee, I believe, usually meets the third Thursday. I'd have to double check the exact date. So it should be on a published agenda. The Triple S committee is chaired by Ian Sorokin, and Beth Bartz and Leslie King are the members of that committee. I would suggest for parents to reach out to them and share your concerns about this statement, because it will be reviewed by the committee. SEAC's policy committee will also be reviewing the statement and issuing information to either a for or against document. SEAC is charged at looking at whether the usually policies will meet the unique needs of the special ed students in our population, and then the SEAC voting members will look at it and vote on it. I do know the policy committee is going to be looking at that and providing information support language to their position or SEAC's position. We have to take anything that goes to any of the committees to the full SEAC membership for a vote. So that will be going before the SEAC full board in their business meeting on October 7th. So the policy committees is meeting. In fact, we have a meeting tomorrow evening, and that is open to the public. I'm not trying to advertise SEAC here, but those committee meetings are open, and we do like to have public comment and input on that because we are working for our disability community. But that statement will be going for review. So I do want to encourage the community to continue to reach out to at least the SSS committee about this, because your voice was heard, the concern was heard. So this full school board was inundated with emails, and so the concern was enough to have it be sent for review by the SSS committee. One of the things in the signature statement is that it would allow the IEP services to be proportionalized. So whether you're in school or out of school, and to be able to alter the services in the IEP without a meeting.
Right.
So currently, SEAC is also looking at policy 5310. Our current policy 5310, which is on special education, states that you cannot, in Loudoun County, make any amendments to an IEP without an IEP meeting. Mm-hmm. So if you received your distance learning IEP via email and asked to sign it, that was going against policy 5310. Because we have a school board policy that strictly prohibits it. So another concern with this language in the prior notice of parent or guardian consent is that it allows for amendments or changes to the IEP without a meeting. So it seems to be in conflict with a standing policy that we currently have. Mm-hmm. So I do think if you are listening from a different school division, I know in Prince William County, if you request them to remove this language, they will. Yeah. They just caveat that we will have to have a meeting every time we go in to distance learning or in school, which most parents would rather have a meeting and discuss what is or isn't working across those different platforms.
Yeah. Sharon, I just want to jump in and add that, as we said earlier, though, parents should not feel pressured that they have to sign this language, right? So just because it's being proposed to you, if and many parents had concerns about it. And as Sharon said, they were doing a great job of advocating for their concerns and what does this mean? But if your child already has an IEP in Loudoun County, let's say, many families already had their annual IEP meeting prior to COVID-19, they signed an IEP, they gave consent to Loudoun County to provide certain special education services and accommodations. The county does not, parents are not required to sign another one 4 months later or 5 months later, because the county is wanting to reduce services, wanting to put all of these other provisions in. When we talk about consent, parents, that's their prerogative to give consent, to not give consent, to give partial consent to the language that they do and don't agree with. So while this is going to the policy and we're hoping that it will be revised, I just want to reiterate to parents that you do still have decision-making when it comes to what you accept and what you agree to, and you can utilize those procedural safeguards that we outlined to try to work towards agreement with your school district.
I want to just add a quick note about all of the distance learning amendments. And I know that in many of those meetings, the school personnel talked about the proportion of services that gen ed students are receiving, and so therefore you get this proportion based on the previous services you had in the IEP. And I want to caution parents when you hear that language to reject that language. Remember that IEPs are unique to your child, and the school division should not have any metric or ratio or proportion or anything that predetermines what your child's services are, because then they are no longer being provided to address your child's unique needs. Mm-hmm. So if you had an IEP meeting and the school division had no data or no new information to share about how your child does in a distance learning platform to support any reduction of services, then I would suggest that you don't have enough information to make that decision. And then you should maybe delay until you have been in a virtual environment for 4 to 6 weeks to collect some data to see how your child is doing, and then come back to the table where you can make an informed decision. So I just want to say that, you know, the school division was very quick to want to make a lot of IEP changes, to change the IEP, to reduce services based on a metric that they had or proportion.
The instructional calendar, I think they were calling it.
Yeah, the instruction, whatever. All of it is, the school board should not be, you know, isn't mandating what your IEP services should be. Again, I go back to that OSEP letter. The IEP team must not be prevented from doing their job. So please take, you know, don't feel pressured. If they're pressuring you, just say no. Say, I'm not comfortable with that right now. We can come back and visit this in 4 weeks when we have more data. Let's see how my child is doing.
Yeah. And, you know, to echo what Sharon is saying, the U.S. Department of Education said, you know, this is really good time for school teams to roll up their sleeves and get creative and consider all the ways that they can provide the services that are outlined in a student's IEP. So it was very surprising to see that almost, you know, across the board, Loudoun County was proposing reduced services based upon the instructional calendar. So hopefully everyone who's joined us tonight understands that they don't have to agree to that these decisions for their kids should be based on present levels, data informed. If you don't have the data, request the data. I do, Sharon, we forgot to mention, and I think this is so important, that in that Virginia Department of Education COVID-19 recovery document, there's about half a page that talks about the importance of parent provided data, that parents were really the only ones who had access to these students for all of fourth quarter, and if they didn't have extended school year services, then over the summer, and that the Virginia Department of Education is strongly urging school teams to meaningfully consider parent provided data from where their child was pre-COVID pandemic and right now. So that is also a change in guidance, telling, you know, in the past, it's always been thought of as, you know, school teams with their appropriate training have been viewed, and in the court system have been viewed as the educational experts. But this is new guidance that says, you know, everything has changed in terms of a pandemic and how we're educating kids, and parents now have a unique perspective on what their child with disability requires, and IEP teams should be listening and incorporating that into present levels, into decision making. So I just wanted to make sure we don't leave you tonight without knowing again how important your parent input, parent data is. So
and Lorraine, just to build on that just a little bit more, because I think that I'm so glad you raised that point, is even now, as parents are sitting with their children and helping them, guiding them, helping them log on, helping them mute, helping them unmute, helping them split their screen, go to a different app, all those things, all that information is data about how your child is able to access or unable to access their education. And if they can't do all of those things and they can't learn the information or glean that information independently from what's being presented, then they're not even able to benefit.
Yes.
In the same manner that the other children are able to benefit. So all that information is highly important, especially if we have children that may use alternative communication devices and other things to communicate. So all this information and the parent data, you know, the school can only see, like I can only see Lorraine sitting in her beautiful office. So they can only see that little square, and depending on the number of kids in the school, they might only be able to see 6. So they can only see a certain amount of students. So they may not know or have any idea that you are sitting there with that child hand over hand doing things or scribing for that child so they can type in the chat. All they see is the chat information coming back. So that, or they can't read something, so you're muting them and reading it to them, explaining to them, breaking down the language so they can participate. You need to be keeping your data so you can share with the school team, because all they're seeing is what's coming back on their side, because they can only record what they see and what their outcomes are. So it is so important in this time for the parents to be keeping data, and so they can share that what's happening in order for their child to to access and meaningfully benefit from the instruction that's being provided.
Yeah. So Eileen, I know we just have a couple of minutes. Do you want to ask one last question, or should we share some resources?
We have two questions
Okay, sure.
in the Q&A. So the first is from Amy, and is, what would some of these new executive functioning supports look like?
Sure. So they can, again, they have to be individualized for your student based upon what they need. But if a student requires more frequent check-ins from a teacher or special education teacher, that's a critical one, right? So depending upon the age of the student, you know, are they ready to go? Do they have what they need? Is all of their assistive technology equipment working? That was one thing I wanted to mention, that in this day and age, assistive technology consultations can be requested as well to make sure your child can access the curriculum. But additional, you know, time helping with workload management. So maybe it's a virtual breakout as part of a learning lab for a middle school or a high school student to review, you know, assignments and workload and help chunk out that workload and be mindful of, you know, upcoming projects. It can be really whatever the child requires. So, you know, again, these services are important because when they were in the classroom, and I guess where I'm seeing it as the most critical is for the students that were in team taught classes, and we're getting the benefit of push-in special education support as part of a gen ed setting, right? So that's no longer so easily possible to have a teacher walk over and check and make sure that they're following along, they're writing things down on their agenda, they understand the expectation. That's not happening anymore. So more frequent check-ins, helping with organization, workload management, chunking of assignments, all of that could potentially be an important executive function service provided by whether it's an instructional aide or special education teacher, case manager. Sharon, you can chime in as well.
I would say all of those things, and some of the other things, you know, often our students with executive functioning difficulties have difficulty with planning their writing assignments. So not only planning what their assignments are, or taking that project and knowing how to break it down into manageable pieces, but they also have difficulty planning their writing. So any of those things where you see that could be a goal in the IEP, that could be a support in the IEP to help with that brainstorming process. Maybe once that's done, the student can take that information and run with it, but they may need support there. So it could be a variety of different things, from creating, you know, a Google fillable form to help them track their assignments, to some app that they may choose to use, or use some of the features within Schoology to help manage it. I think one of the big selling points of Schoology was that it was more user-friendly and that it would help the students manage their assignments. But again, it goes back to how each individual school is using it and how each teacher is populating their Schoology page, and if they're listing all of those assignments, because I still see a lot of wide variation between schools.
Yes,
and teachers.
Well. All right, Eileen said we have one more question. Yeah.
No, I have two more.
Okay.
Okay, so this one I'm going to read. It's a little longer. My daughter hasn't regressed since school was closed, but she didn't advance either, and she's not where she's supposed to be for first grade. Will recovery services apply? And I'm working to set up mediation. I want to know if it should be added to the petition. My original mediation was to provide service for her October 13th when special education went back to school. She's in gen ed.
So I'm just going to start off by saying potentially, right? I think she was saying that she hasn't regressed, but she hasn't progressed either, right? Made any progress. And of course, her IEP is designed for her to make progress. So baseline data is going to be really important here, because they are going, that's one of the criteria that needs to be considered when we're looking at COVID-19 recovery services, is what is her rate of progress? What is her expected rate of progress? And does she need additional services to make progress. As Sharon and I said it from the beginning, it's really hard for us to give like individualized recommendations because we don't have access to your child's performance reports or progress reports, or what is even reasonable for your daughter given her learning profile. But yes, potentially, I think that that she could be eligible for COVID-19 services if she's not making progress towards her goals, because she, through no fault of the school district, did not make progress because she was, not able to get that instruction. So Sharon, if you want to add on, or we can, I don't know if there's another.
I mean, I think it's, like you said, we would have to have more information, but when you look at case law, and there is a long history of case law here. Mm-hmm. Compensatory services, I mean, they're not called recovery in case law, but they look at where the child would have been if the services had been provided. Right. And exactly. So that's where the word compensatory comes from. So they're making up for where the child would have been if the services had been provided. So I would say I agree with Lorraine. Potentially, we need to look at, if you have the progress reports and you can clearly track her progress over time, you might be able to do that from either 2 or 3 years worth of data. We were here, then we were here, we were tracking on this curve, and here's what her current rate of progress is. And then here's COVID and we're still here. And we know that if we look at previous years, she would have made this much progress over this period of time. So that would be a way to help calculate that and look at that with the current data that is being taken.
And I'll just add, I was looking at Lorraine's website earlier today, and she has a very good resource for compensatory services. So it could be worth looking at that website. I will also be sending out their contact information and websites tomorrow with a recording of this.
And I just want to make sure, Eileen, we have some resources that we want to share with parents. We talked about the Virginia Department of Education. We talked about U.S. Department of Ed, the COVID-19 FAQ document from the VDOE, Virginia Department of Ed, the U.S. Department of Ed. If you go to their website, /coronavirus, that's where you can get a link to that OSEP letter that we were talking about that just came out on September 28th. But at the top of our bullets here, because as Eileen said, both Sharon and I work as paid advocates, we want to make parents aware of PETSE, which is a state-funded parent educational advocacy training center. This is their webpage. They have resources. They have specialists who answer the phone and provide advocacy advice. They don't attend meetings, but they're kind of like, as Eileen said, she doesn't attend meetings necessarily, but she can answer quick questions. She can give guidance, share resources. So parents should know what PETSE is. And lastly, I know we wanted to talk a little bit about Title II, the Guide for Effective Communication, which talks about, Sharon, I'll let you, you like to talk about Title II, but I think I want to ask you to mention student choice when you explain Title II as an important resource for parents.
Title II covers a myriad of things. It covers effective communication. So when you're looking at effective communication, you're looking at what, the mode of communication comes back to parent and child choice. And so, it's not considered a methodology, it's a mode of communication. So it truly is student and parent choice and driven. And one way for districts to meet the requirements under Title II for effective communication is through an IEP or through a 504 plan. So, but it isn't required. They are still required to meet the requirements of effective communication. And that goes for speaking, writing, and speaking, writing, and reading. So any form of communication is covered under that. The guidance document here is kind of a Q&A kind of information document. It's very easy to read. So that's why I chose to put that one out there. But I do think it's important in this time where students that have more impacted communication needs, and especially if they're using a AAC device and need hand over hand or modeling or things like that, it's very important to understand what school divisions are required to do to make sure that they can access and benefit from their education. And one other resource I didn't think for us to put here Lorraine, but I think would be a good parent resource might be COPA, the Council of Parents, Attorneys and Advocates, COPAA. They do a lot of advocacy at the federal government level, and at the higher level with advocacy, but they take on big issues. And they too, now of course you can there's some information available to everyone, but you can join COPA. And then as a member, you have access to some forums where you can ask questions, and they have a plethora of guidance documents also.
Yeah. So, and Eileen mentioned my website and Sharon's website through the law firm. So if you want to reach out to us, this is our contact information. We want to make sure we share that. And we are certainly open to help parents who need advocacy support throughout this process.
Thank you. And I want to ask, can I quickly ask the last question?
Of course.
Okay. And thank you everyone for being patient. This is going over. The last question is from Sandra, and it's asking about collecting data. The question is, can teachers ask a student to collect their own data so that the teachers can use it? An example would be timed reading for a student with dyslexia and special ed. I'm concerned that my student, 1, doesn't understand the request, and 2, the student doesn't want to look delayed for their self-esteem. And this is for a high school student.
Mm-hmm. So I personally have never heard of a school team asking the student to create their own data. That's interesting, but if it's using a program that the school district is providing to the student, and they're saying, click here when you start, stop here, then I guess that could be perceived as collecting their own data. Can you read the question again, Eileen? Because I want to make sure we answer her specific question.
Sure. Can teachers ask students to collect their own data?
Okay. I guess they can, right? Anybody can ask anybody to do anything, but is it appropriate is what it comes down to. Is it appropriate to ask the student to collect their own data? And I think as a parent of a student with disabilities, I don't think it is appropriate. Sharon's going to give her opinion. I think it's the school team's responsibility to collect that data and to not put it on the student. Certainly we want student input, especially at the high school level, about what their challenges are, how they think they should be supported, but it isn't the student's responsibility and could potentially add to anxiety, emotional distress. I mean, you mentioned, Eileen, they don't want to feel like they're behind. There's a whole host of issues that could crop up when you're having students create their own data. So yeah, Sharon, I see you nodding your head.
I'm like,
I know, I haven't heard of that one.
I've not heard that one, but I mean, when you think of your IEP and you have, say the student has a fluency goal in their IEP, you would measure that goal by teacher data.
Right.
And to have the goal in the IEP, that means it requires specially designed instruction by a special educator. So the special educator delivering that specially designed instruction should be collecting the data and not the student. And they also have to remember, in this virtual world, we also have to be very cognizant of student privacy and not wanting the student to feel different in front of their friends. And so I do think our schedules have a lot of time built in, that the learning lab time or time on Mondays where the teachers could meet individually with a student for a set amount of time to do goal work. High school students typically have study hall time that they could be pulled out of to do goal work and take that data. So I really don't feel that it would be appropriate to ask a student to implement their own IEP. Yeah. And often you'll see in IEPs where they want the students to advocate for their accommodations. That's the same, those kinds of goals. While I understand we want to teach the students to self-advocate, they should not have to advocate for something that's already legally mandated that the school division provide.
And I would Sharon, I'm just going to jump in and say to that parent, I would ask them why. Why do they want the student to collect his own data, right?
Right.
Because to me, it almost makes me think there's like a staffing concern or something else going on. But if they can't give you an appropriate rationale for why your student should be collecting their own data, then I think as a parent, you simply say you're not comfortable with your student collecting their own data, and that it's your understanding that it's the school division's responsibility to collect that data and bring that to the team.
And you can look to see what's in the IEP for the goal as how you're measuring it. Typically they say running record or written teacher data or written data. But again, I really have a hard time saying that the student is responsible for collecting their own data.
Yeah. Mm-mm.
Eileen, do we have anything else?
Oh, Eileen, you're on mute now. Sorry. I feel like I'm the mute police tonight, right?
We have no more questions.
Okay.
I want to thank Lorraine and Sharon so much for being here this evening and for taking all this time. And thank you to everyone who joined us this evening, especially for us going overtime. You did a wonderful job talking about parental rights and answering questions.
Well,
Thank
it's my pleasure. And thank you, Eileen, for the invitation. You know, both Sharon and I, we've known each other for years, and we've worked together through SEAC and decoding dyslexia and what have you. So we're kind of partners in crime when it comes to helping parents of students with disabilities. So.
And you're a great team as well.
I had to mimic that. Lorraine and I have been gosh, we've known each other for years. So, and I think what is great about Lorraine and I and our relationship is if I have a question, I don't hesitate to reach out to Lorraine and say, hey, are you seeing this too? Or is it me? Am I reading this situation? Because I do think that collaboration and with other advocates, I reach out to some other advocates in the area that I know, and to talk about the issues that we're seeing is powerful. It's powerful for our families. And you don't get into working as an advocate unless you are there for the students and the families. I mean, that's why we do what we do. So I think all of the advocates are very open to collaborating and sharing what they're seeing with each other. And I think that's wonderful for our students.
Especially in these challenging times, I'm going to add. So thank you again, Eileen.
You're welcome. Thank you for all that you do.
All right. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.